we have to talk about tension. It is not easy for most of us to instantly get our heads around how to securely but not too firmly hold yarn in one hand whilst wiggling and manipulating a hook in the other hand to form an intricate series of complex knots. It's really normal to find tension so frustrating to try and get to grips with. You are not alone. I was the same way too. I didn't understand why I produced something that looked like I'd switched hook sizes, but it's really normal. Today I'm going to give you some tips for how to improve your tension or get off on the right foot with tension, and some great ways to practice your tension as well. I'm going to do it in do's and don'ts format because I love that, and by the end of it you'll find yourself feeling a lot more confident about how to get the right consistent tension for your crochet projects. I create tension when I'm crocheting by taking the end of the yarn, looping it around my finger, bringing it around the back of the hand, and then I create tension with my first finger. So you can see as I work that that finger is holding the same position regardless of what I'm doing with the other hand and with manipulating the hook and with moving the yarn. So I'm holding the yarn still and pinched with my fingers at the bottom, my little finger there, and I'm controlling the level of tension as I move with my first finger by moving it very slightly backwards and forwards or holding it in place. That's quite a standard way of making tension, but if you're doing it in a different way, these tips will still apply to that. Do start practicing your tension with a fairly thick yarn weight. So I would say Aran or up. So if you look on your yarn packets, it will say DK, sporting, a word like that. And that's to denote the thickness of your yarn. And you want to practice tension with one that says either Aran or chunky in my experience. Super chunky or super bulky, you might find that's going in the direction of being a bit more difficult to manipulate again. But for me, in my experience, I found people find it most easy to practice tension with an Aran or chunky weight yarn. Don't follow the hook size for the hook that you're going to use with that yarn. I want you to size up, maybe a millimeter, maybe even 2 millimeters from the size given on the yarn. Now this is because what we're practicing is a very specific part of the skill. So that's gonna make your stitches quite big and look a bit loose compared to the yarn fiber that you're using. That's not a problem, because remember, all that we're doing here is we're making a sample, going backwards and forwards, is we're practicing getting that tension right. And if that's what you're doing, using a slightly overly large hook for a fairly big yarn is going to be the easiest way for you to practice that and start to get consistent with it, because it's just slightly less fine motor movements. Choose a really simple pattern to practice with. So I encourage people to start either with a granny square or just a sampler of single or double crochets, or half doubles depending on how complicated you want to get. You want something that is simple enough that what you're thinking about is controlling the tension and not deciphering a new pattern. And along those lines, choose a repetitive pattern to practice with. Again, you don't want to be overthinking what you're forming with your hands. You don't want to be planning ahead in terms of the pattern or constantly looking down at the pattern instructions. Something that is essentially a little bit mindless, and that's why I love granny squares for this, is a great place to begin. Sit comfortably. I'm the worst for this. I cannot sit like a normal person sitting in a chair. Like if you drew a picture of how a person's meant to be in a chair, my legs don't do that. I'm always sitting on my feet, or my legs are somehow wrapped 8 times around each other, and I'm slouched in a corner. A comfortable position and a good posture will really help you to focus, and they'll also help to prevent things like feeling strained. So make sure that you're fairly upright, roll your shoulders back if you can, and sit comfortably. Put your hands in your lap. So there are lots of different ways to hold your hands while you're crocheting, and again, there is a large amount of personal taste in this, but in my experience, keeping your hands in your lap while you're crocheting is the best way to keep, again, those joints nice and comfortable, the flow of what you're doing going, and it'll help your tension to be more relaxed and therefore less uneven as you tense up and loose down and tense up and loose down in your body. You want your body in a position that's going to stay very, very similar as you work, because that will help your tension to come out similarly as well. Take it slow. Don't try and rush and power through. I know it's so frustrating when you want to be able to do something and you're like, I'm practicing tension, so I'm going to do some practice of tension. Take a deep breath. If you realize that you're getting a little bit tangled in a muddle, or you're getting tight stitches, loose stitches, tight stitches, loose stitches, just take a breath and imagine that you're going in slow motion as a demonstration for somebody. Slow it right down. It'll really help. Keep the session short. I would say if you have, a little bit of a time blend in the situation, even set a timer on your phone for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and then walk away. You can do several short sessions in one day if you have the time and ability to do that. That's great. But try and keep the individual sessions when you're working, moving and manipulating your hands nice and brief. Be gentle. It's very easy to over tense when you're practicing tension, because the word is a very tense kind of scrunched up word, isn't it? But in fact, when tension works the best, it is when you are soft and delicate with what you're holding. You do have to be slightly firm, but not nearly as firm as you might think that you do. So a gentle touch, imagine that you're being kind to your yarn, and I think that that will really help. Try to be consistent within each project. So if you've started making a sampler, look at the tension that you've given your previous stitches and try to replicate it. Now I know that's easy to say, but as a general rule, if your previous stitches have looked quite tight, then you've probably got quite firm tension. So your piece of yarn is quite taut. If they're loose, try and relax into it a little bit more if they're tightening up. Consistency is absolutely the key for tension as far as crochet goes. It's a really important part of making sure that the project looks even at the end of it is consistent tension. Stop if you feel frustrated. Now, maybe you're not easily frustrated like I am. I am impatient and impulsive, and I find it really hard to keep my cool sometimes. And it's really important in that context, if that happens to you, just put it down and walk away for a bit and come back. Stop if you get frustrated. Don't try and push through the annoyance. It never helps. Don't let the yarn dig into your finger. If you've never done this, it's going to sound slightly out there, but it's something that I see when people are practicing their tension. They are so tense, so tightened, so keen to be consistent and even, that the yarn makes this groove into their finger where it pulls into it. If your finger starts to get sore, if you start to see a groove in your finger, then you're stitching too tightly. We shouldn't be causing ourselves slight surface damage even while we're doing this. So just loosen up, roll your shoulders back, reset and start again. Don't let it dig into your hand. And on that note, don't start with a coarse yarn. You want the softest possible yarn when you're practicing your tension, because you want it to glide over your hands lovely and evenly. Now I've got to say, you can have too soft. There's this lovely yarn that's, it's called Buttery in the name. I'll find out what it is and try and remember to write it underneath this. But that is actually quite hard to make tension with because it's so slippery. But you don't want something that's coarse that's going to rub on your hands when you're concentrating on the mechanics of what is happening in this hand. Merino wool is the ideal if you're not allergic to wool. For me, that's a great type of wool to practice tension with. It flows through your hand, but it's got a tiny bit of enough friction that it's not just like a big old jelly that's going to splodge away. Don't be afraid to undo your work, especially if you've used merino wool, because, you know, a little bit pricier. But a huge, again, amount of the practice for tension, undo and repeat. If you get to halfway through a row and you're like, wow, my tension's been all over the place with this one, just undo it. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. I mean, you can keep it as a memento of your excellent learning journey if you want to, but don't worry about undoing things. There's even a word for it, frogging in crochet. It's such a common thing that people made a word for it. It's fine. Don't worry about undoing it. Don't practice when there are distractions. That's so easy to say because, you know, so many of us have got jobs and children and pets and partners and friends and uncles and various distractions that are going to try and talk to you or get your attention. But the best environment to practice and learn is one that is calm and quiet. For me personally, what I like to do is put on a podcast or a TV program that I've watched before or some music I'm familiar with. So there is something sort of backgroundy, but it's not drawing my attention, and I can try and sit back and practice the new skill. And don't worry if it takes a while. There is this huge impetus when we're learning a new thing. I think a lot of it comes from ourselves, that we should get to grips with it and then move on to the next thing and then make elaborate stuff. Half of the fun of this craft, and I have to keep reminding myself of this, it is the journey. And we're always on a journey, there's always something new to learn, isn't there? If tension is a thing that's going to take you a while, who cares? No one's monitoring you, it doesn't matter. Everyone who has functional use to some extent of their hands, you can do this, you will get there. Just enjoy it, enjoy the journey, and let me know what you think. Are you an experienced crocheter? Do you have tips on tension that I've missed out for people who are just learning? Put them in the comments section below and we'll have a chat there. Happy crocheting!